This is the American Indians, Indigenous Peoples' Truths. Justice for all, the most dangerous show on media anywhere. OCO and greetings. I'm Winter Nightwolf, and this is the Indigenous Peoples' Truths. Justice for all, the most dangerous show on media anywhere. Before we get started, I would like to say that we must acknowledge the land that we walk upon here in what is known as the Western Hemisphere, and especially to their ancestors, descendants, and indigenous people who live here now and have lived here forever before the arrival of the European invaders. They lived on this land that we call Turtle Island. I would also like to say Happy Hispanic American Month. This is the Hispanic American Month. And a little later in the broadcast, my niece is going to tell you something about it. So let's get started with the show. Tonight's broadcast is going to encompass, we're going to do a fireside chat, which means those of you that view this broadcast will have an opportunity to ask questions of me and two of my guests. My guests tonight are Don Wolf, D-A-W-N Wolf. He's Crow, Creek, and Black, and a good friend of mine for many, many, many years. And also my sister all the way from Oklahoma, Marilynn Vann. Marilynn is the president of the Cherokee Freedmen's Association. So we'll be back in a minute to start this conversation and to answer your questions. We're going to do this once a month from now on, give you an opportunity to ask us questions. And hopefully we got answers for you. We'll try. And now it's news from Indian country. Of Chief Magistrate retired of the Virginia Supreme Court, my Chota Cherokee brother, Don Walker. Take it away, Don.
Thank you, Brother Nightwolf. OCO, to all my brothers and sisters across this great land. It is all Indian country, from the Atlantic to the Pacific. And I'd like to welcome everybody to the podcast. We've got a good one going on tonight for you, something that I have been involved with in the past to a degree, and I'm very happy to get into it and talk to you about it. And this first news article comes from IndianZ.com, and it concerns the dark legacy of boarding schools. I would venture to say that 99 or more percent of the United States has no idea what an Indian boarding school is, what it did, what it looks like, where it is, anything else. And to give you a good example, the most infamous one is the Carlisle Barracks today, the military barracks. That was originally an Indian school. Some genius came up with the idea in the 1800s that if we created these schools, took these children by force from their families, put them in these schools, we could get rid of the savage and turn them into good white folks. Well, at this point, I'm not sure who was the savage, but let's get on with this IndianZ.com and talk a little bit about that. This comes from Tim Geigo. As the years go by, the number of boarding school survivors dwindles, and most of us still alive with our memories are in our 80s, and it won't be long before there'll be none left. But I have been on Facebook and have received letters prior to that from members of the generation following the boarding school experiment who say that they know their mother or dad or grandparents went to the boarding schools, but they never talk about it. I didn't want the memories of those days to die, so I wrote a small book about it. And he's saying he's not trying to promote his book, but he's telling us that this records some of the history of these boarding schools. Now, there is a belief in my family, there's no way to substantiate it, but there's a belief in my family that my grandmother and great aunt were adopted to keep them from being taken to the boarding schools. They were adopted by a white family when they were anywhere between birth and 4 years old. They show up first when they're 4 years old, but to keep them out of these places, they literally were killing fields for these children. The Carlisle School, for example, has over 130 graves still there. That's the only thing left of the Indian school now. The buildings are there, but that's the only thing left showing that it was a Native American school. Over 130 grave markers, and they all show one name and one date. Now, the one name is probably the name they went by, not knowing anything about a last name, and the one date would be the date they died. And this is typical of these boarding schools. In Carlisle, for example, they taught the boys shoe repair and the girls sewing. That way, they could put them into some of the higher occupations in life and give them a really high-quality education. I'm aghast at the whole thing, but that's how it worked. Let me get on back to what Geigo has to say here in his book that came out in 1975. It was published again in 97 by Clearlight Publishing of Santa Fe, New Mexico, and renamed Children Left Behind. When they went to these schools, these kids, everything about their culture was taken away from them. They were corporal punished for using their language. Their hair was cut. Their clothes were changed. Everything was wiped out from them, and you were subject to serious punishment. I mean, physical punishment by using any of these things, like your language. They were trying to completely wipe it out. That's one of those big skeletons in the closet nobody's talking about. We've barely gotten into the Japanese internment camps. We've just kind of recently opened up that, yeah, we did that, and that was wrong. But they haven't gotten into these Indian schools yet, and I'm hoping that they rip into them soon. It's a very important place in the world, and there's a lot of history to that. All right, in the book, it intends to bring back memories of the boarding schools to those who survived them. It is also intended to cause those memories, good and bad, to bring about the process of healing that has long been denied. But more than that, it is written to bring out the truth that was hidden for too many years. There again, as I said, about like the Jap internment camps, this one's a real skeleton, and it's so far back in the closet, you can't even find it. The new book was expanded and contains many of the columns I have written over the years, visiting with other boarding school survivors and sharing memories. It's not trying to promote the book here, because the profits from the book go to different Native American charities, because it is one of the few that revives the dark legacy of the Indian mission boarding schools. And I encourage younger generation to read it, so they will know what their parents, grandparents, and those that attended these schools, experienced. And it was an attempt to destroy the culture. And they didn't make any bones about it. That's exactly what they started out to do. That was their stated goal, and they went after it. Fortunately, it didn't succeed very well. And let me get on here and about the experiences that attended the schools. The book was cathartic to them and helped them to heal. He started to write the book when he was about 17 and had to spend later in life in the military and work and so forth, and finally got around to writing this thing and publishing it. And these schools had a dramatic impact on the lives of thousands of Native American children, some for the good and some for the bad. To this day, there are those who never forgave or forgot. Many went about relearning their own history that was stolen from them at boarding schools. So as the generation of survivors fades, it will be up to others to keep the dark memories of the BIA and Indian Mission boarding schools alive. This next article is the Cherokee Nation making record investment in early childhood development. What a great stride they're making here with this. This is a wonderful thing. This is by Principal Chief Chuck Hoskin Jr., Cherokee Nation. Cherokees have long known that the first years of any child's life should be spent in a nurturing and enriching environment to build the best possible foundation for their whole family to come, whole life to come. Our collective future is being written today by the investments we make in our youngest children. That's why I'm excited about Cherokee Nation's aggressive new plan to help our youngest learners and caregivers. Already, they serve almost 900 children through its Head Start programs, which were first started in 1978. Our tribal facilities are full of the best staff around, and they teach a first-class curriculum. We know the programming is regarded as among the best in the country. However, we have lacked the first-class facilities to house this instructions. The Verna D. Thompson Early Childhood Education Act of 2021 will change that. This historic investment of $40 million will replace 8 existing Cherokee Nation Head Start centers with new facilities and upgrade other learning sites within the Cherokee Nation reservation. The act will modernize tribe facilities for current students and thousands of Cherokee youth who will follow them. Besides the main Head Start campus in Tahlequah, we operate 65 Head Start classrooms across the Cherokee Nation reservation. And those facilities are aging and they're in need of repair and replacement. I plan to build new Cherokee Nation Head Start centers in Tahlequah, Kenwood, Jay, Cherry Tree, and Stillwell, and Redbird and Salislaw, and Salina, along with a site in Pryor that is already in the construction planning phase. Funding for the upgrades and new Head Start replacements is part of a $3.4 billion budget passed recently by the Council of the Cherokee Nation. It is the largest annual budget in the tribe's history. The act is named after Cherokee Nation's Head Start director, Verna Thompson, who worked for the Cherokee Nation in early childhood for more than 37 years. Her years of dedicated service to early learning in the Cherokee Nation are unparalleled. She's approved her position not just as her job, but as a calling. You can see the fruits of her labor in thousands of families across the Cherokee Reservation who have benefited from Head Start. Cherokee Nation Head Start students are predominantly Cherokee from low-income homes, and the ages range from as young as 6 weeks to preschool age. The children are taught cognitive, language, motor, and social skills. As part of the act, the Cherokee Nation will also make a comprehensive review of all early childhood education services for Cherokee citizens every other year, so they can identify problems to fix or successes to expand on early. The first years of childhood go by quickly, so we must stay on top of what our children need. They look to the council for this legislation and give any further feedback. My hope is they pass it in next month's meeting so we can begin the process of planning and building quickly as possible. Our federal Head Start program has improved the education, health, and welfare of thousands of Cherokee families over the past 40 plus years. It's time now to build a state-of-the-art learning environments for our youngest Cherokees. 21 hours ago, Natives aimed to boost voting power in New Mexico, the Associated Press. Interior Secretary Deb Haaland Pueblo speaks during a brief press announcement there. Coalition of Native American communities has proposed redrawing New Mexico's political map to boost indigenous voter influence in elections. I think that's an excellent idea, and I hope they go forward with it to get enough of a voice in there for the Native Americans. Jay, this has been an interesting amount of history, and I'm getting ready to turn the program back over to you, brother.
Thank you, Don. Appreciate it, man, and appreciate you. And thank you for joining in with us tonight.
Pleasure, Jay, and I'm very happy to be back on the air with you here with the news. Donada Goai Agidohi.
Donada. And that was Don Walker, one of my dearest friends for the last 30 years, who is a retired judge, state of Virginia. And when he was in the court system, he did an excellent job. So, celebrating Hispanic Heritage Month. And I'm going to turn it over to my niece, Sydney Parker. And she's such a pretty thing. Okay, go ahead. Take it away, Sydney.
All right. So, Bartolina Sisa, born in 1750, died in 1782, was an Aymara indigenous woman and leader of the Adian Rebellion of the 18th century. Together with her husband, Julian Apasanina, better known by his self-ascribed name, Tupac Katari, she led an army of approximately 40,000 indigenous rebels against Spanish colonialism in Bolivia and alongside her sister-in-law, Gregoria Alpasa. This army seized La Paz from the Spanish and camped in El Alto for a total of 6 months. When Nina was captured, Sisa continued to command the rebel army until her own imprisonment by Spanish forces. Bartolina was shown no mercy during her conviction and was sentenced to a brutal execution on the 5th of September, 1782. She was hanged after being publicly humiliated, beaten, and raped in the Colonial Square, now Plaza Murillo. Once dead, the Spanish cut her body into pieces and publicly displayed her head in order to intimidate other indigenous people, also sending her limbs to be shown in several different villages. Bartolina Sisa stands for the bravery of women in battling Spanish colonialism in Latin America. Her infamy lives on, and along with her husband, she has become a figurehead for various guerrilla armies and social justice groups in Bolivia today. September 5th, the date of her execution, has been declared the International Day of Indigenous Women in honor of her bravery and commitment to liberating Bolivia from the oppressive Spanish colonial presence.
Thank you so much, Sydney. I am so happy to have her with us. Sydney is going to be one of our interns. Her brother Sean. Let me tell you about who these people are. Sydney and Sean are the 4th generation grandchildren of Quanah Parker, the last Comanche war chief. And I'm so proud that they're with us because all of us that are my age and older, we have an obligation to our young people so that they will never forget who they are and where they came from. And that's why I took these two in, and we're going to make this thing work. So thank you again, Sydney. Okay. Speaking about the Spanish and their involvement in what happened in the New World, as they called it. In the very near future, I will have my cousin, who is Taino, and that's part of my blood. Her grandmother, my grandmother, and Gina Rosario. All three grandmothers were sisters, and we didn't find out about this until 7, 8 years ago. My cousin Vanessa recently contacted the King and Queen of Spain. And the reason she did that is because they wanted to put this gigantic statue of Columbus up on Borican, the island of Puerto Rico. And they fought this thing until the King Juan Carlos, and his wife, Queen Sophia, agreed and said that they will not promote this. They will not do an inauguration of this statue, because what Columbus did was an unforgivable sin. He opened the doors to slavery and all kinds of stuff, murder of people. They would cut people's hands off and feed them to the wolves and the alligators because they wouldn't go along with his program. So look for that show in the near future. Next week, I think it's next week, we're going to have my brother Spike Moss on from Minnesota. And Spike is a Black Indian who has been involved in civil rights and human rights ever since the 60s, the 1960s. And he's got some things to tell you about what's going on with Native Americans in the state of Minnesota. Did you know that white folks drive in pickups when Native Americans have to walk miles and miles to the grocery store, and on their way back home, they run them over and leave them laying there like roadkill? And the law enforcement department of Minnesota haven't done a thing. 2 years ago, they were finding Native women that had been murdered and stripped of their clothing, tied ropes around their ankles, and you would see them up on the lampposts in Minneapolis. And they've done nothing about that. George Floyd, everybody knows about that. Nobody's been prosecuted. Nobody's been arrested. So they look at us as if we are not human beings. And it's time to do something about that. Next week's show, there's a promo that's getting ready to play. Don't go away. We'll be back in a couple of minutes. That sign of 38 natives being hung by Abraham Lincoln in Mankato, Minnesota. One of my closest friends, his great-grandfather was one of those 38. And we're going to talk about that next week. So I would like for all of you to, when you look at this tonight, like the show, subscribe to it, and follow us on YouTube, Facebook, under Winter Nightwolf Productions. And also, you can see this show on Twitch. And I see somebody to my left.
Hello.
My executive producer and my real close. Hey, Leslie Fry.
So I'm so sorry. We had some technical difficulties with the promo for next week. We will be showing that later. But let's go ahead and get some questions. We've had a couple of questions come in. So let's bring in our guests for tonight for our fireside chat. Okay. And get to questions. We got a lot of eager people out there with questions.
All right.
So would you like to introduce everybody, Elder?
Absolutely. We have Marilynn Vann, who is the president of the Cherokee Freedmen's Association. I met her over 30 years ago when I went to Oklahoma. And Marilynn has been right on target fighting against this discrimination that has been going on with the Cherokee Nation, which I hope has come to an end. Discriminating against Indians with black blood. Hey, Marilynn, how you doing, sweetie?
I'm doing pretty good. It's good to be here.
Okay, so you're ready to be a part of this army, answer these questions tonight, right?
I'll do what I can. I'll do my best. I'll just say that.
I know you will. Another very familiar face to me for the last 30, 35 years. His name is Don Wolf. And Don Wolf is Crow, Creek, and Black. Don Wolf is a very good friend of mine. He was a professional conga player, and he's played with some of the biggest names in the industry. But the most important thing about Don Wolf, he never changes. And for that, I'm proud of you, bro. I really appreciate you, okay? So you better write this down in a book, because you know I don't say that too often about you.
I'm writing it down right now.
Okay. So we got Don Wolf, we got Marilynn Vann, and we got Leslie Fry, and we're ready to take your questions and answer them to the best of our ability.
All right. So we do have a first question that did come in. It came in anonymously. And the question is, why is it so difficult for people to believe that there are Black Indians?
Well, I think it's because they really don't know the history of the formation of this country. America is supposed to be so great, but when you stop and think about it, the founding of this country was founded on bloodshed. There were 112 million of us in what is known as the United States of America. By 1934, they had murdered all but 2.3 million of us. So how do you murder 111 million Indian people? But, you know, Black people came here over 500 years ago, 400 years ago. They came here not as slaves, they came here enslaved. They worked the fields and the plantations right alongside Native people. And if you think that there wasn't some serious relationships developed over 400 years ago between Blacks and Indians, then something's wrong with your head. You know, you have no idea or try to stop people from falling in love. You don't have control over that. And in the Cherokee Nation, before there was a Cherokee Nation in Oklahoma, there were a lot of mixed race people. Marilynn, do you want to comment on that?
Yes, I do. Part of the problem is that the media, for so many years, if they showed an Indian in a movie or some kind of a TV show, almost all the time it was a white person that I think it was Chuck Connors. I think I kind of remember seeing some real old movie, and I can't remember if he was playing Geronimo or who it was, but you know, so you never saw a person who appeared to have some African ancestry, you know, playing an Indian in a movie, or the like. And so I think that's a big part of the problem. Now, nowadays, I think it would be pretty politically incorrect to have a person that is, you know, known to be a white actor that is playing, acting as Geronimo or somebody else. And then another thing is that it seems to me that like in a picture of some Indians at the White House, those Indian leaders who clearly have some African ancestry, somehow or other, they don't seem to be in the picture. Some of the tribal leaders say from the East Coast, and I'm not saying only from the East Coast, but that is, I think that's a big part of it.
Yeah, it's the over sensationalization of what an Indian looks like. Everybody in Hollywood wanted to look like Tonto. And that's the biggest lie they ever put out there about us. I've seen, when the white man came here, Indians were medium to dark complected people. Didn't have all of this long hair in 2 braids. And if you really want to get a little deeper into it, just look at the Seminole Nation in Florida. That was the safe house for escaped Africans to go to, and the Seminoles took them in. You're going to tell me that there was no love between those people? Come on, give me a break. Don Wolf, I see you ready to talk. Go ahead.
That's one of the answers that came to me was, and the word was terror. There was a lot of killing around any of us acknowledging that we were mixed blood. And I know a number of families over the years who have those stories. And even in my own family, my grandfather taught me, and he instructed me when I was a little thing, not to tell anybody about it. But he taught me all these things, the stories and whatnot. And but now there's a big problem now, because the interaction between whites and natives and Africans is fraught with a lot of fear, and a lot of it is historical. And there always seems to be every generation keeps producing children, boys and girls, who have this very aggressive warrior inside of them. And there was somebody designated in the families to teach them what to do with that energy, and how to control what they really wanted to do to whites. And without going into that, I'm just giving glimpses of some of the things that are behind this story, because there's nothing simple about the story. There's a complexity to it. And I can go more, but let me listen to somebody else speak, because I was taking notes, because the things that both of you said have pricked my memory, different things.
Okay. I want to go to Leslie in a second, but I want to tell everybody something. I am of 4 bloods. Taino Indian from Puerto Rico, Borican. Shoshone from out in the Midwest. Cherokee from my ancestors in South Carolina. And by the way, those Cherokees down there, when they were trying to pull off the Trail of Tears, my family went up in the mountains and fought Andrew Jackson off. They never submitted. They never allowed themselves to be put on that trail. And when I met my cousin, Vanessa, I had gotten a call a few months before from one of my cousins that lived in New York. And she had said to me, Jay, do you know what happened to all of Grandma's papers? And my grandmother was Cherokee. No, my grandmother was, her name was Sylvia Robles Cruz from Old San Juan, Puerto Rico. I said, no, I don't. What happened to them? She said, Grandma sent all her papers to me. I said, wow. She says, I know you're getting ready put this organization called the National Congress of Black American Indians together. And based on conversations that you have with so many people. She said, but I got something to tell you. I said, what is it? She said, I was reading a letter from Grandma that she wrote 45 years ago, telling the family that her great-great-grandmother was an African slave on the island of Puerto Rico. She said, well, what do you think of that? I said, well, I always knew I had some of that in me. She said, why? I said, because I could dance and keep rhythm.
You're so wrong for saying that.
No, I'm serious. I'm serious.
Oh boy.
Yeah, I'm serious. But anyway.
Natives can dance too. So you got a double. You got natives can dance too.
Oh yeah, natives and Africans and
Yeah, and all Aboriginals.
Yeah, get down, get down. Time to get down.
I just have one comment about that. And my comment about that is that I think it's very hard for us as Black people to conceive that some of us may have heritage. We've got a lot of people out there that are saying that it's not true, that there is no such thing as someone who is a Black Indian. And I'm using that term loosely because there is no such thing as Black anything. But you have to understand that based on where Native Americans were when people came over here centuries ago, they were either varied from dark to light skin, depending on where they were near the equator. So to think that there were not melanated people in what we call Turtle Island today is kind of ridiculous to think that didn't exist. But we've been so indoctrinated as a culture to believe that these two things are separate from one another and that they don't mix. Not to mention the fact that most of us were misidentified and mislabeled in the U.S. census, you know, after the Dawes Roll Initiative. So, I mean, yes, it is a possibility. And for any of those that are, oh my goodness, I forgot our genealogist is supposed to be coming in. For any of those that are, of us that are thinking that you can't find Native American blood, Native American ancestry as a whole only goes back 10 generations. You have to look at your family tree. Right. You have to look at your family tree. Let me just get her in, and I'll 1 second. Okay, we do have another question. There seems to be a debate about Aboriginal people being first Black people being here in the U.S. And this debate between people who are African and people who are Aboriginal. You have some people that believe that Africans were here before the Aboriginals, and they were the first Black people. Can you kind of clear that up for us? Because there is this thing that people are saying Black people were here first before Native Americans.
Don Wolf, take that one.
The simple answer is no. And it's well documented by various scholarship and for various scholars. And it's also in the stories and the way, one way of looking at this is where would that question come from? And my living in different parts of the world growing up, one of the things I've noticed here in the United States among Black Americans is echoed in the old spiritual of being a motherless child. And what that pain is began, you see it in children who have been really hurt in their souls. They begin to make up their own creation stories. They ignore the facts, but they make up their creation stories out of pain. And those claims are easily discounted. One of the things that supports this to keep going on is that for a number of reasons, and I don't really understand how it happened. No, actually I do, but there has been less, the numbers of I'm just stick with Black folks because I spent a great deal of time with them this past few decades. What I've noticed is that there is less reading and studying and more reacting to titles, provocative subjects. And that's a fault intellectually and spiritual. And there's a resistance to do anything else. And it's easier to go and grab on to something sensational. And it's harder to sit in your study, go to libraries, talk to scholars, listen to lectures over months and years on subject after subject to get a full perspective of what transpired in the centuries before. And then when you want to understand how the Europeans saw the world, you have to understand that the Europeans wrote everything down. But then you have to also broaden the definition of what literacy is, because there are different forms of literacy. But you're not going to understand what the last thing I just said if you're a person that does not study. And because a large percentage of Black Americans identify with the Christian church, they don't even study that well enough to understand some of the fallacies in the thinking. So it's difficult to answer this without seeing someone, because when I've been in public and had these discussions, it ends quickly because too many in the audience who are Black, if you know how to ask questions, particularly as you get older, you study dynamics, I've discovered that there's a great deal of pain in those people who are in those churches, who are of that thought. And so the healer has to come out to get to the pain of how somebody recreates the creation story that is theirs truly. And so you need to have a scholar, you need to have a healer, you need to have a truth teller. And those are some of the people that need to be involved. And we need to Black Americans need to have to reestablish the disciplines, the intellectual disciplines that were in place during slavery and after slavery.
You know, we got a friend. His name is Professor Morgan J. Peters, a member of the Wampanoag people in Massachusetts, and he was the director of Black Studies at the University of Massachusetts, Dartmouth. And most of you know him by his African name, Waleem. And when I was on the radio, which I'm going to be back on the radio in about 2 weeks, there was a question he asked. He said, of all of these Black people jumping up and down, talking about Africans were here first, he said, I got one question. Who the hell did they meet when they came over here? The indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere. You know, so it's, folks, please use some common sense before you open your mouth. Think about what you're asking people. Do some studying, some reading. I've got over 5,000 volumes in my house. I've read them all 2 or 3 times. And that don't make me a scholar, but it makes me one that knows the truth and the facts. So, Marilynn, what's your thought real quick?
Okay. I do not believe that, I've heard people talk about on YouTube or other places that African people came here and there were no who are indigenous people in today's tribes. Those individuals were not here. Well, I disagree with that. Certainly, people have the right to their theories or books. Now, I am not going to say that there wasn't some Moors, people from North Africa or such that came here on a ship and did some trade, did a little intermarrying or whatever, but, not to colonize. More, as I said, seeking trade, kind of like the Vikings. I mean, they really didn't come here to conquer. But, people are aware that, yes, there were some people from Scandinavia that came here 1 or 2 times. And so, I'm cool with that. That very well may have happened. But so far as, I believe that the majority of people of African descent came to this country after 1492. And again, some of them may have been on a cruise, of the Santa Maria, whatever Columbus's ships were, or other explorers. Most likely there were some hired hands there. Could even have been a black captain, but that wasn't the majority of the people.
That's right. And you know something to add to that, recorded history, the first Africans that came here were the Phoenicians. Of course, the white man wants you to believe, oh, they were white ocean-going sea merchants. They were not. They were black people from Phoenicia that had established international trade on the high seas. They didn't come here to take anything from anybody or marginalize or subjugate anybody. They came here because they heard that there were these people on the other side of that big pond of water, the Atlantic Ocean. And a lot of the tribes, northeastern part of the United States, got involved in international trade with them. They even sailed on their ships back to other parts of the world. So this whole argument about who the hell was first, who was here first, it makes no sense to me. When we got the same problems with the climate that we had over the years, we got the same problem with folks wanting to come here that don't look like us, wanting to take over, wanting to set the rules, wanted to murder us. We got those same problems. They still exist. So instead of us arguing with each other about who the hell was here first, why don't we sit down at the table and solve some of these problems that we have, that if we don't solve them in the next 150 years, there will not be anybody here because the earth will not be habitable. Let's work on solutions to save the environment. Let's work on solutions to clean up the land. Let's work on solutions to take care of each other. I don't know what anybody else believes. I believe I was put here to bear my brothers and sisters' burdens, to take care of each other. And if we're constantly fighting each other and arguing over some stupid crap, it's not going to happen. We're going to all be dead.
What's very interesting is that we're arguing about who was here first when none of us own this land anymore. Mm-hmm. So it makes no sense for us to be arguing about bragging rights about anything right now. Mm-mm. Because we don't have anything. We don't have anything because we can't be unified. We don't have anything because we're not educating ourselves about it. We don't have anything because of a colonistic mind and the beliefs that we are different types of people, that we're not the same, that we never intermarried with one another, or never intermingled with each other. It is important to educate yourself about who you are, period. Knowing who you are gives you strength, and also makes sure you know that whoever it was that came here many years ago, no matter how they got here, they survived enough for you to be here. So make them proud.
That's right. So can we take a little break and come back?
Absolutely. Let's take a little break, and we'll be right back after this message. Hopefully this will work.
Okay.
Hello.
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 Welcome back.
Welcome back. So Curtis wanted to know what was the name of the first Africans again, please. And I believe that you're talking about the Phoenicians.
Yes, the Phoenicians. Yes. And you can go and do some research and find that in volumes. Look for a book by Dr. Jack D. Forbes called The American Discovery of Europe. Jack Forbes is one of my best friends before he walked on into spirit world. And at the time that he lived, he was the president emeritus, professor emeritus, University of California, Davis. And he wrote the proposal for the first Native American university in the United States, DQ University. Look that up.
I
Okay.
wanted to answer Jimmy's question, and a lot of people are going to be confused about this, but yes, there were a lot of Africans that were from Israel. A lot of people that were Jews migrated to Africa, in particular in Nigeria, because Nigeria was a place of trade, and people went there to start businesses. So you're absolutely correct.
Okay. Oh, so Gary Lewis has got a question. We have more in common than not. So working together is more important than claiming who was first. Absolutely, brother. Absolutely. You got that right. And we got from Curtis Watson. He says, thanks. You're welcome.
This question is for Marilynn. Marilynn, do you ever foresee any of the other 5 civilized tribes eliminating by blood or blood quantum from their bylaws?
It's not going to come easy. With the Cherokee Nation, it took litigation. It took both in tribal court and in federal court.
Yep.
It took friendly persons up on Capitol Hill, passing legislation, great people like Barney Frank, great man, and Mrs. Waters now is a great champion of the freedmen. And also it helps if you have persons who are currently members of the tribe that are vocal advocates. And in some tribes, those persons who support freedom and citizenship is a very small number of people. There are bigger numbers in the Cherokee Nation. There was more support there than any of the other 4 tribes, just to be honest. So it's just hard to say what the future is, but we're going to keep fighting. We're going to keep pushing, and we're going to keep shining the light on this racism.
And Marilyn, I remember when I first went to Oklahoma and met you, and you were sitting at that table over there talking about justice for the freedmen. And I sat down and talked to you, and I made you a promise then that I would work with you. I had a radio show in Washington, D.C. I had you on the show. I had a lot of people on the show. And the chief then, this idiot, Chad Smith, was the one that was going to get money from the Cherokee Casino to push his issue about there's no people in Cherokee that was ever had black blood, a racist. And I made him a promise that the next election that he ran for, that I would see to it that he never got elected again. So then I started to unite with some of the people down there in Cherokee, and got names of all the people that were members of the nation that lived outside of the nation in metropolitan cities. And I had a team of my friends to call them and let them know what Chad Smith was up to. And he did not get elected again. So, there's strength in numbers, just like I mentioned earlier. Let's sit down together and work this out, because we can work it out. When you came to Washington that time, I introduced you to the Black Caucus, and they took up the fight until we got it before federal Judge Kennedy, who told Chad Smith to go stick his head in the sand somewhere, because you will reinstate these people that you kicked out the tribe. You will give them their benefits, and you will take care of the next 7 generations. And all the money that you withheld from them because you kicked them out the tribe, you will give them their money and their allotment money. So it's strength in numbers, you know. When you got it like this, anything can get involved. But when you got it like this, nothing can get in between us. We can make it happen.
Well, the media, you know, persons like yourself that have stood up has been very important to get it there before the people. A lot of people, including members of Congress, you know, were just in great shock about how the Seminole Nation, for instance, was telling tribal clinics, telling Indian Health Service clinics not to give vaccines to Seminole Freedmen tribal members. People dying when they could have gotten the vaccines because the tribes got quite a bit of vaccine early on.
Well, you know what? I will tell you this. When President Obama got elected, and at his inaugural ball, I was a member of the American Indian Society in Washington, D.C. And every time a president of favor got elected, we would throw a ball for him. So we're waiting for, it was 2 hours to wait for him to come in. And I was in the back room talking to people from Oklahoma. And this one Kiowa, this old fool, was in there. And I said to him, I brought the question up. I said, what about the freedmen? Oh, they're not Indians. And when I brought points up and told him that these are the facts, blah, blah, blah. Well, you're just stupid. I said, I tell you what, get up, because I'm going to knock the hell out of you. You know,
No
how
more
dare
fighting.
you? And I said, how dare you not accept people that's got your blood? Well, those are bastard people. I said, yeah, okay. I invited Chad Smith to my radio show that night, Chief Tex Hall. I invited, who was the other one? Dr. Jack D. Forbes. He was alive then. And so we had a radio broadcast. Chad Smith comes in 15 minutes behind everybody else. And he says to me, I'm Chief Chad Smith. I said, yeah, Chad. He said, that's Chief Chad Smith to you. I said, okay, Chad. I said, I got Chief Tex Hall on the phone. Oh, yeah, let me say something to him. How you doing, Chief Hall? He said, I'm doing fine, but I got a question for you, Chad. How the hell do you get rid of your people? He said, what do you mean? He said, these people have been in your tribe long before you were even a thought. How do you get rid of them? He said, well, we're gonna answer that question a little later in the program. And then Dr. Jack D. Forbes said, Chad, I got to ask you a question. He said, what's that? He said, if you shake your family tree, you're going to be very surprised at who jumps out. And
That'd be a surprise.
and then his phone went dead. My engineer said, Chad Smith hung up. The very next day, Chad Smith was in Washington, D.C. at the National Museum of American Indian, still trying to push his issue about there are no black people in Indian tribes. So I'm sitting in the audience. He had his spill. He said, now we're going to go to some questions from the audience. We lined up behind the microphone. The first guy on the other microphone was one of Chad's supporters. The first guy on the microphone that I was on was one of Chad's supporters. But when it came to me, the question I asked him, I said, Chad Smith, yeah, what can I do for you? I said, why did you hang up on the Night Wolf show last night? Oh, I didn't hang up. There was a problem with that little radio station's communications device and all that. I said, you're telling a damn lie. Excuse me? I said, you're telling a damn lie. Well, how would you know? I said, because I'm Jay Winter Nightwolf. Well, we're going to take a lunch break and come back.
Speaking of that, let's talk about that. We do have about 15 minutes before we end our broadcast this evening in the Fireside Chat. Let's talk about people saying that they're full blood. What does anybody think about that terminology, especially somebody from the 5 civilized tribes?
Well,
Is there such thing as a full-blood Native
No.
American?
first of all, there were more than just 5 civilized tribes.
Well, we do know that.
Yeah. And secondly, um, this whole thing about, what was your question again? I'm sorry.
The people believe saying that they're
Oh.
full-blood.
You know what? If you can find a full-blood Indian in this country or in South America, Central America, you got to look real hard, because over the centuries, blood has mixed and mixed and mixed again. Now, I do know a few full-bloods, but they're so far out in the rural, remote areas of parts of the United States. And you know what? That's good. That's good, because they know who they are. But somebody to come up to me and tell me that I'm full-blood, I said, full-blood what? Mutt?
Truly.
Yeah, you know. So I discount that. Unless you got documentation to prove it to me, I don't want to hear that.
But even then, you can't be full-blood anything. I mean,
No.
the intermarrying over the centuries, that doesn't exist.
Exactly.
Curtis has a comment. He said, I live in Oklahoma and I work in Shawnee, Oklahoma, And to be honest, most of the Native Americans that I speak with, the Seminoles especially, think that the blacks got there into their tribe by just way of being African and adopted in. This is the story, the narrative that most people believe here in Oklahoma.
No, let me tell you what happened. When the enslaved people escaped from the plantations and the auction blocks, the Seminole Nation opened up their lands to them and allowed them to come and be a part of the tribe. So that lie that they've been telling all along, I know the history. I got books on it. You know, they were welcome into the tribe. And the reason they were welcome into the tribe, because nobody else would take them in. Well, some of other tribes took them in, but on a large scale, the Seminoles took them in. And they were the ones that Andrew Jackson had his men to go into those swamps to try to fish them out. And guess what? Andrew Jackson's men became gator bait.
Mm-hmm.
Let me just talk about that. Let's talk about something in particular when it comes to the Seminole Nation. We're going to talk about the Seminole Rebellion. That was a war that happened that was over 10 or 11 years old. And it was those people that were the Maroons, which were the Cimarrons, which is what the name that they were given by the Spaniards, and the Seminole tribes, which they intermingled and intermarried. That war went on for over 11 years. It cost the U.S. government back in that time, which was 1850s or so, over $2 million, and over 5,000 people were dead. And that's not accounting for the civilians that were encroaching on the territory at that time. To say that Seminoles are of pure blood is ridiculous, considering that they were intermarrying with the Cimarrons, who were Black people.
Right.
So the one most famous Black Cimarron and Black Seminole was Juan Caballo. And I encourage you all to read up on this man named John Horse, or Juan Caballo.
Yep.
Led that army. It was such a disaster for the U.S. government at the time when they were fighting, because the Seminole Nation knew the Everglades. They knew the land of Florida. No, everybody else, the Europeans did not know that land, but they did. And they always trapped them in that area because they were aware of the territory of the land. Juan Caballo moved to Mexico later because his family was threatened. They planned to kill him. But this was an educated man who spoke several languages, could conduct himself within European society, but he was of mixed Native heritage.
Yes, he was. They called him, back then they referred to him as a swamp nigger, which I don't like that, you know.
Who calls that?
Yeah, I know.
Who said that?
Huh?
Who said that he was that?
That's what they called him.
That's what they called him. Yeah.
Wow.
And
Go ahead.
And this man was so profound in what he did. He was actually out there when Chief Victorio was trying to stay in the United States. And he was actually one of the scouts for the White Cavalry. If you look at the movie was it Buffalo Soldiers, starring Danny Glover, you'll see the truth to that story.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Curtis wanted to know how many civilized tribes there were. Honestly, people were civilized before Europeans got here. So that term
Right.
civilized is kind of a moot. It's a terminology that's what do you call the word? It's the difference. The difference is that what Europeans called us as being,
Mhm.
you know,
We were all
barbarians. We were already established in societies and nations. So there were
we
more
had
than the five that we call five civilized tribes. Is only called five civilized tribes because they adopted European
Right.
religion and
behavior,
ways.
behavior. But let me tell you this: there were over 1,200 tribal nations before the white man came. And down where you're from, a place called Cahokia, that was our centralized government. Every year we sent representatives from every tribe there to meet and learn from each other and how to treat each other. So this whole mess about civilized tribes, please, everybody was civilized until we got crazy when they got over here. We had to fight our way through all that mess. But this thing about five civilized tribes, come on, please. You mean it was only five civilized tribes out of 1,200 nations? We had our own governments, So, Marilyn, I see you not saying anything. Come on, Marilyn.
Okay, well, I know everybody wants to talk here. Yeah, the federal government, that is their term, but
Mhm.
I wouldn't. But for instance, are the Osages, the Comanches, Shawnees? Why aren't they civilized? I mean, they didn't enslave their own children. They didn't sell their own children or nieces or nephews. Um, the But yeah, and then so far as the full blood Indian, very few. Okay, the federal government made those decisions, but
Right.
later on, I've seen many testimonies of people who said, "Well, that's what they put me down on this Dawes roll or whatever roll." But I have some white ancestry, I have some black ancestry, or colored ancestry was really more what they said. And
Mhm.
so there's some even people walking around with cards that say that they're full blood, which is really a small number of people. They really have ancestry of white or black or whatever, and also a lot of tribes or confederations of tribes. Creek Nation, that's a confederation
Mhm.
of 40, 50 tribes that all came together. Coweta, Alabama, Yuchi,
Mhm.
Eufaula, and
Cherokee.
so I mean, yeah, there were Cherokees who were adopted into the Creek Nation,
Mhm.
based on treaty agreements in the 1820s between those two nations, and some Creeks that were adopted into the Cherokee Nation again under the same agreement. So there's this whole business here of blood quantum, and I got Creek blood or whatever. It's just really a fiction.
Well, they could take that claim along with $2 and buy a cup of coffee at 7-Eleven. Sorry.
Donald,
But
do you
it's
have
sure got
anything
a
to say?
lot of people fighting. It's got a lot of Indians fighting, and
That's
Yeah.
what you
It's-
say is worthless because you're a thin blood. What I got to say is more important because my card says, I'm 3/4 or whatever.
yeah, because the government, the white government, gave it to them.
I kind of want to talk about what Destiny is saying. And it looks like Destiny's very young, and she's saying there are tons of full blood natives. But Destiny, I want to challenge you to actually do your history because there is no such thing anymore. From what was the original people here that were here, there has been a mingling of blood since then. So there is no such thing as a full blood. And if they are people who have consistently intermarried with other Native Americans, they're still not full blood because they're of a different nation. So let's talk about this. Really, really go and educate yourself
Yeah.
about what is such thing as a full blood. Full blood was a terminology that was given to us after the Dawes Commission. Nobody cared about that kind of stuff before the five civilized tribes were invented, or probably you were either of that nation or you were not of that nation. And that is it. It didn't matter what color you were of that nation or not of that nation.
Yeah.
Okay,
And-
before they started these alignment rules, there were no degrees of blood. For instance, the Shawnees in Kansas, the 1850s, they were given allotments, but they didn't have degrees of blood. Also, if you look at the list of Shawnees that came and took citizenship in the Cherokee Nation by treaty in 1869, there is no blood degrees of those persons immigrating in. Okay, just talking about the Cherokee Nation, the minority of people in the tribe were full bloods when they started it. I mean, the truth in the matter is, if you look at Indian country across the board, there's a handful of people that are quote unquote full blood Indians. That is just the way it is.
Mm-hmm. Before you make a statement like that, what was her name?
Her name is Destiny.
Destiny, you need to go and read books. You need to go and do your ancestry and not depend on ancestry.com. Go to your family, talk to the old people. They could tell you the truth, okay? Because I don't want to embarrass you, but I'm sorry, that was really a dumb statement that you made.
Well, she's young, Elder, so she doesn't really know. And I think too that she's been like most of us have this colonistic mentality about what is Native American.
Mm-hmm.
Let's face it. Based on this so-called blood quantum, and if we continue that, there are a lot of people who are living on reses right now that are marrying people that are not of that nation, outside of that nation, and that blood quantum is diminishing as a result of this. It was meant to destroy these people. It was meant to destroy our relatives. So that's what blood quantum was set up for. It was not that. You are anybody who has at least any of that blood running in them as a Native American, is part of those who endured everything that happened to them when the Europeans came over there. You are still considered Native.
Yeah,
you have Native blood.
And the other thing too is, we cannot allow somebody else to tell us who the hell we are. Your family can tell you. Anybody else? No way. And Gary says, I'm always learning. I knew of only 5 civilized tribes, right? Because that's all they ever taught and printed in those books, 5 civilized tribes. What about the other tribes? None of them were civilized. And the next statement was, young lady?
Sorry, she was just talking about her heritage.
She says, he is right. I am mixed from a little bit of everywhere. I did a DNA. Yeah. So does that make you any less human than anybody else? No. We are all members of the human family. All that other stuff is a bunch of BS. Now this lady here, she said, Katisha, I'm related to people from 3 different North Carolina tribes, and they are all triracial for the most part, at least in my family. And you know what, Kadisha, I got to tell you something. You're a beautiful woman. And don't ever allow anybody to tell you who you are other than your family. And it says Curtis says, I was truly about to say, it is as simple as just do your own genealogy. Don't rely on DNA. Do the real paper trail. There you go.
Okay, so I decided I was not going to debate people this night, but I just want to tell Destiny, even tribes in Canada are not full blood. I'm just going to tell you that. We're talking about people who are Mi'kmaq, people who are there who Black people who were free people from Africa actually intermingled with Canadian natives. Even those who live in the remote Inuit Alaska may have European DNA or Viking DNA in them, because people were traveling here way before Europeans got here. Mm-hmm. Educate yourself, young lady.
Mm-hmm. And most conversation, for the most part, is really, we're talking about the 575 tribes in the United States. We really are not, I know, like myself, I'm not really qualified to talk about the history of the Metis and Inuits and the Canadian Inuits and such like this, because I've only met a handful of such people.
Well, I will tell you this. I met a true medicine man about 35 years ago when I had cancer the first time. I had cancer. I beat cancer 4 times. His name was Don Cardinal. And he found out after listening to me on the radio, one of my friends called him and said, Don, we've been brothers for years. Jay Nightwolf is in trouble. He's got cancer. What can we do? Don Cardinal came down to Long Island from Canada, along with his 4 sons, and built a healing lodge on Long Island. And that's where my healing began. And I will never forget that man, because after I went to that sweat lodge with him, I met some amazing people. Our medicines, they supersede anybody else's medicines. And you'll find that most of the medicines that they have on the market now are derived from our plant medicines. So I just want to thank all of you all for joining in tonight. And we got to do this again next month. We will do it again. And my advice to all of you is read and study. Do your own DNA. Don't allow anybody to tell you who you are. I had to do my own DNA. In my family, my Cherokee people from the South, they were Christians. And every birth for 5 generations was recorded in the Bible. They couldn't get birth certificates from the government. And the very same for so many of us. And all of you Native people from Virginia, if you don't know who Arthur Flecker is, you need to look him up, because he was the one that, if you were born Native, would not allow Native to be on your birth certificates. They call you colored, mulatto, and everything else, but they would not allow your tribal identity to be there. So they've been doing this mess to us for years, and we just, for many years we fell for it, but the time is over now. We don't have to fall for that mess anyway. Somebody says, Destiny, elders and others are here to educate. You seem to be argumentative. Are you receptive to knowledge other than your own? Thank you so much, sir. So thank you, Leslie, for tonight, and thank you, Don Wolf, for being a part of this conversation. And of
Thank
course,
you for having me.
You too, Marilynn Vann.
Will you all be back next fireside chat? Can you come back?
Yep.
I know for myself, when I can, it all depends on the date for me.
Yeah. Usually when I call Marilynn, she says, okay, I can do it. I got to cancel something. Right, Marilynn? Okay.
I do what I can.
Don Wolf, we need to hear more from you. You were very quiet this evening.
Well, Don Wolf is the son of a United States diplomat, one of the smartest men I ever met in my life. And his mother, oh, she was amazing. So it says from Laura Gardner Jeffries. Thank you, elders. And what was the one before that?
I don't know. Someone said that they have Cree blood. I mean, we're getting a lot of good nights, so we might as well go ahead.
You got
Somebody
Gary.
Said they love you, Miss Vann. And I have Vans in my
Thank
family
you.
tree. Thank you for the knowledge.
So all of you that have watched the show tonight and enjoyed it and learned something from it, please tell your friends about this show. It's on every Wednesday night. And go to the show, watch it, like it, and subscribe, and leave a comment. Thank you all. And I'll say it in the Cherokee language, Marilynn. Danada, Goai, Wado.
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 Thank you.
You're welcome.